Roy Sullivan was a forest ranger who had unbelievable attraction to lightning, or better said, lightning had an attraction to him. During his life, Sullivan was hit by lightning 7 times and survived each time. The first lightning strike shot through Sullivan's leg and knocked his big toenail off. In 1969, a second strike burned off his eyebrows and knocked him unconscious. In 1970, another strike burned his shoulder. In 1972, his hair was set on fire and Sullivan had to dump a bucket of water over his head to cool off. In 1973, another lightning set his hair on fire again. In 1976, a lightning strike left him with an injured ankle. In 1977, the last lightning bolt sent him to the hospital with chest and stomach burns. His 7th strike put him in the Guinness Book of Records. In April 2003, 27-year-old Aaron Ralston was climbing in the Utah Blue John Canyon when an 800-pound stone fell on him, crushing his right hand and trapping him. After struggling unsuccessfully to chip away some of the stone with his multi-tool knife, Ralston attempted to tug the rock away from him with his climbing rope. That didn't work either. Finally, after being trapped for 6 days, Ralston understood that the only way out was to amputate his own hand to survive. Even though the pressure of the stone had cut off some of the circulation and he no longer had any sensation in his hand. Cutting through the nerves and breaking the bones with his knife was 100 times worse than any pain I have felt before. Amazingly, he later resumed climbing thanks to a special prosthetic hand with a built-in climbing pick. Ralston's story was recounted in his book Between a Rock and a Hard Place and the movie 127 Hours. Some people say that Marathon des Sables, a 6-day 155-mile run through the Sahara Desert, is the toughest athletic event on earth. That's because not only you have to run as fast as possible while enduring savage heat of the sun, but there's also danger of getting lost in one of the most inhospitable places on the planet. In 1994, a 39-year-old Italian pentathlete named Mauro Prosperi discovered just how unsafe this challenge is. After he was forced by an 8-hour sandstorm to take shelter for the night, he awakened the next morning to discover that he was lost in the desert and only had half a bottle of water. That's why he started drinking his own urine. 2 days in, he stumbled into an abandoned Muslim temple where he noticed some bats huddled together. Prosperi grabbed a handful of them, cut off their heads with a knife, and then sucked out their insides to drink their blood. Eventually, he did his vampire act on 20 bats. When another 3 days passed with no sign of rescue, he slit his wrist and waited to die. But his blood has thickened due to dehydration, so it wouldn't drain out. Prosperi took this as a sign that he should keep living. On day 8, he discovered an oasis and got to drink some water at last. The next morning, he saw some shepherds who saved his life. In May 2000, Anna Bagenholm was skiing on a familiar slope outside Narvik in Norway, when she lost her balance on a gully and fell headfirst into an icy river. Her head and body became stuck under thick ice, but she managed to find an air pocket so that she could keep breathing. After 40 minutes of struggling to free herself without success, the exhausted skier was in fight with hypothermia, a potentially lethal condition in which the body loses heat faster that can be generated. It took another 40 minutes for her companions to cut the ice and pull her out of the cold water. By then, her body temperature had dropped to just 14 Celsius and her vital signs were so low that she was clinically dead. But doctors managed to revive her by pumping blood through a special machine that warmed it. After a few months of rehabilitation, she returned to normal health. Helen Klaben wanted to travel from Fairbanks to Seattle and decided to save some money by flying with amateur pilot. It turned out to be a fateful choice when a plane crashed on February 4, 1963, in a snowstorm in a remote part of Canadian wilderness. The passenger and pilot suffered broken bones and other injuries, but they were alive. Unfortunately, they had no survival equipment except for matches, and their food supply consisted of 4 cans of sardines, 2 cans of tuna, 2 cans of fruit cocktail and bottle of vitamin pills. To deal with nighttime temperatures that drop as low as -42 Celsius, they used gasoline from the fuel tank to light a campfire. After a week, their food ran out, forcing them to survive on melted snow, until an aircraft finally spotted them. Rawicz, a young Polish officer, was called up to defend his country against the Nazi and Soviet invasions. He was captured by Soviet forces and sent to Moscow in 1939. There he was falsely accused of spying and sentenced to 25 years of hard labor. In April 1941, in the middle of blizzard, Slavo and 6 other prisoners escaped from labor camp. They walked 4,000 miles to the south, crossing Gobi Desert and the Himalayas and enduring cold, blazing heat and lack of water. 3 of the 7 died along the way by the time they had reached India. This story eventually became both a book, The Long Walk, and a film, The Way Back. In 1945, a man survived the atomic blast at Hiroshima, catch the morning train so he could arrive at his job on time in Nagasaki, where he survived another atomic blast. Tsutomu Yamaguchi just might be the luckiest man on the planet, as he is one of the tiny handful of people to have survived not one, but both of the American atomic bombs dropped on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945. During that fateful summer of 1945, Mr. Yamaguchi was 29-year-old technical designer of oil tankers for Mitsubishi Heavy Industries in his native Nagasaki. On January 26, 1972, a Yugoslavian Airlines DC-9 departed from Copenhagen to Belgrade with 28 passengers and crew. At an altitude of 33,000 feet, a bomb in the cargo section planted by Croatian separatists exploded. The plane fell apart and crashed on the mountains. In what must be one of the greatest survival stories of all the time, Flight Attendant Vesna Vulovic survived the 33,000-foot descent sitting on the tail of the plane. 22-year-old Vulovic wasn't even supposed to be on that plane. As she later stated in an interview, it was another Vesna who was supposed to be on that flight, but she was happy with the mix-up as it allowed her to make her first trip to Denmark. She ended up with a fractured skull, 2 broken legs, and was paralyzed from the waist down. Vulovic spent many months in and out of hospitals, but operations allowed her to walk again. She became a celebrity when the Guinness Book of World Records invited her to a ceremony in London with Paul McCartney. She is listed for surviving the longest fall without a parachute. Luck has always been on his side for Croatian music teacher Frane Selak, born in 1929, who is well known around the globe for many fatal accidents and spectacular escapes. The first of his numerous near-death experiences began on a cold January day in 1962 when Selak was on a train to Dubrovnik. It suddenly derailed into icy river, killing 17 passengers. He managed to escape with a broken arm, minor scratches and bruises. A year later, Selak was flying from Zagreb to Rijeka when a door suddenly blew away from the cockpit of the plane as he was blown off the plane. Selak was lucky enough to land on Haystack and wake up some days later in hospital, with minor injuries. It was in 1966 that he met with a third misadventure while traveling on a bus that crashed and plunged into a river. 4 people died. Astonishingly, Selak managed to escape in one piece again. In 1970, Selak was driving along when all of a sudden his car caught fire. He was fortunate again to have left the car before the fuel tank exploded. 3 years later, another of Selak's cars caught fire, blowing flames through the air vents. To a greater dismay, Selak lost most of his hair. In 1995, Selak was in Zagreb when he was hit by a bus, again leaving nothing but a few injuries. In a surprising turn of events in 2003, Selak won the $1 million lottery, turning him into the luckiest man on the globe. On October 13, 1972, Uruguayan Air Force plane flying from Montevideo to Santiago crashed in a pass in the Andes Mountains. On board was the Old Christians Club, rugby team and family members who were headed to a match against the Chilean team. Of the 45 people on board, 25 survived, but 8 of them were killed 2 weeks later when an avalanche hit the crash site. Trapped in the snow at an altitude of more than 13,000 feet, the survivors eventually resorted to one of the most awful acts of self-preservation you can imagine: eating the flesh of dead friends and family members who were preserved in the cold. After more than 2 months without rescue, 2 of the athletes decided to hike off into the wilderness in a desperate search for help. After 11 days, a search team in helicopters saved their lives. Their story was told in the book and the movie, both called Alive.